The resources that make living in Scotland quite hard sometimes, the wind and the wave and the tides, actually can be turned to our advantage.
Whether you're dealing with a wind platform or an oil platform doesn't really make any differences.
The advantage of wind energy is that you've got an infinite resource, so it's always going to be here. Scotland has been a fossil fuel powerhouse for decades, but the oil and gas fields of the North Sea are ageing. And even with recent discoveries, the country knows that its oil age is already beginning to come to an end.
Scottish politicians see a future for the country as a world-leading testbed for renewable power, and just off the coast from the oil industry capital Aberdeen, developers are pioneering a new way of extracting energy from the North Sea: floating wind turbines. Unlike standard offshore wind turbines, which use masts built onto the seabed, these are placed on floating platforms tethered with moorings, making them easier to install and allowing them to be deployed in much deeper waters. If they can be made commercially viable, floating turbines would open up vast coastal areas around the world to offshore wind.
Within 10 or 20 years, they will reach a time where floating will be the dominant source of wind power rather than fixed. Particularly here in Aberdeen, we have many skills that are designed to learn and operate offshore wind, which we can transfer from oil and gas. When you've got seas like the North Sea which you can exploit, then you will use fixed structures, but most of the world will move and use floating systems.
The drive for a leading role in new renewables technology is helped by Scotland's enthusiastic adoption of wind power. In October 2018, output from Scottish onshore wind farms averaged the equivalent of a record 98% of the country's electricity demand. The Scottish Government has some of the world's most ambitious greenhouse gas targets. It aims to raise the proportion of total energy used that comes from renewable sources to at least 50% by 2030. Scotland is also a focus of international efforts to tap the power of the tides. Underwater turbines are already generating electricity from the powerful currents around the northern archipelago of Orkney. It's still early days for the technology, but if it can be demonstrated to be commercially viable, there are huge reserves of energy to be harvested from the world's oceans. And as in wind, some proponents are backing a new floating approach.
The tidal energy is predictable, it's constant, and it's around the world. And it's very, very interesting because it's a different renewable energies. Okay, it's the difference of the wind energy or a solar energy. We have a boat. It's the first made platform or deck. We have a mast, 13 meters depth, and in the bottom we have a nacelle. Okay, within the nacelle we have two rotors, and we works contra-rotary system. Okay, it's like to install a wind power generator on the water and put in the base of the wind power generator a boat. We joined two historic sectors in Europe: a wind energy sector and a naval sector.
Scottish company Orbital Marine Power built a twin-turbine floating tidal stream machine that generated a record 3 gigawatt-hours of renewable electricity in its first year.
If you look at the wind industry, the long-term socio-economic benefits of supply chain opportunities went to the markets that were at the forefront at an early stage, because you will grow indigenous suppliers and market chain. It's a supply chain that will invest and entrench in the domestic market. And that's what we've been trying to create here. If we have no market, it's very hard for those investments to take place. And if those markets certainly are challenged and taken elsewhere, for example, Canada or France or Southeast Asia, then the supply chain and the industrial opportunities will move with them.
There are lessons here from Orkney's past. In the 1980s, the UK was at the cutting edge of renewable technologies. On Burger Hill stood one of the world's largest experimental wind turbines. In the decades after, wind farms across Orkney, Scotland and the world proved that wind technology is viable. But UK government attention had shifted away from wind, and British companies were eclipsed by rivals elsewhere.
The machines you see around us today, these are generally German or Danish built, and the technology has now proven and it works, and we're at the stage where we can
build a commercial wind farm and let it run for 20 years. And really, that's where we should be with British technology, but it just didn't work that way.
Neil Kermode of ORKNEY's European Marine Energy Centre says the Scottish Government strongly supports development of tidal and wave power technologies, but he worries about a lack of UK government incentives for their deployment at commercial scale.
To get this technology to really get going, what we need to do is recognise that we've got technology that's working, we've got the resources that are here, we've got the ability, we've got the skills. What we're actually missing is that tiny little bit of push right at the start, effectively that bit where you get the bobsleigh going, the push to really hard, get down the slope, and it will then take off. At the end of the day, we're all going to suffer from the effects of climate change if we don't sort this out, and we all need to find a way to make the solution work.
The development of North Sea fields helped make Scottish companies global players in the oil services sector, showing how a country can use its natural resources and an early lead in mastering new technologies to establish a lasting industrial advantage. But repeating the trick with renewable technologies such as floating wind and tidal power will not be easy.